The Los Angeles Dodgers, Baseball's Modern Dynasty, a bedtime sports lore documentary. What makes a modern dynasty? There's a certain hush that only exists at the end of a baseball season, a kind of stadium quiet that isn't silence so much as the breathing space between a last out and a new truth. You feel it slip under the grandstand while the field crew is still coiling the hoses and the outfield is still catching its breath. It's not the hush of disappointment. It's the hush of redefinition. That's where dynasties begin. In the seconds after the noise, when what a team has done is suddenly permanent. For the Los Angeles Dodgers, that hush arrived twice in 2 years. First in 2024, then, defiantly, in 2025. And each time it carried the weight of a verdict. The franchise that had made 100 win seasons feel like a formality finally stacked, the one thing that modern baseball almost refuses to allow. Consecutive World Series titles. The 2025 crown didn't just punctuate a good era, it rewrote the grammar for how a big market machine can survive the expanded playoff minefield, adapt on the fly, and still have enough in the reservoir to win the sport's last game again. If you're looking for the moment the conversation about best team of the decade hardened into the language of dynasty, it's there in those back-to-back Novembers, in the way the second ring validates the first, and in how both rings argue for everything that came before and everything that might come after. A modern dynasty isn't the same creature it used to be. In the 3-round, sometimes 4-round playoff world, with wild cards that can hit like number 2 seeds, and bullpens that can make a 7-game series feel like a daily heist. The October path is more booby-trapped than it was in the tidy old days of pennants and one short series. That's why repeating in this era feels almost mythological. The Dodgers didn't just clear a bar, they raised it. Their 2025 Game 7 in Toronto was the kind of night that vaults an excellent club into a larger category. Will Smith's 11th inning home run, the first extra inning homer ever to decide a winner-take-all World Series game, followed by Yoshinobu Yamamoto on 1 day's rest for 2 2/3 scoreless, and the game-ending double play. That sequence is not merely a memory, it's an argument in lights, a case study in the depth, courage, and decision-making that dynasties require. But to understand why those 2 autumns are the spine of a dynasty, you have to rewind to 2024, because that was the year Los Angeles dragged the last lingering asterisk into the sun. The 2020 was a shortened season chorus had been stale for years, but it still echoed in corners the way old myths always do. The cure was arithmetic, a full schedule, then a playoff run that didn't flinch, then a World Series against the Yankees, the sport's most baroque mirror, and 5 brisk games that ended the conversation. Freddie Freeman authored the series and took MVP honors with a performance that felt pre-scripted by a novelist who loves symmetry. Home runs in each of the first 4 games and a walk-off grand slam in Game 1, the first in World Series history, which tilted the entire week toward blue. Later, in the Bronx, the Dodgers clawed back from 5-0 down to win 7-6, and clinch. A comeback that looked like destiny putting on a Dodger jacket. If you're building the ledger of a modern dynasty, this is where you engrave the first definitive line. 2024. Dodgers 4, Yankees 1. Freddie Freeman, World Series MVP. What changed between perennial power and modern dynasty wasn't simply the final result. It was the way Los Angeles kept manufacturing leverage long enough for the final result to feel inevitable. Some of that leverage was structural. In December 2023, Shohei Ohtani signed the largest contract in North American sports history, 10 years, $700 million, then agreed to the most radical deferral structure the sport has ever seen, $680 million deferred without interest from 2034 to 2043. In the abstract, that's a trivia question. In practice, it was a roster-building technology. The present value reduction kept the Dodgers' tax footprint leaner now, preserving the flexibility to keep buying certainty everywhere else. A week later, that everywhere else took a very specific shape. Yoshinobu Yamamoto, 12 years, $325 million, no deferrals plus the posting fee. A full freight investment in an ace to anchor Octobers to come. One contract opened oxygen, the other spent it where it mattered. That's what dynasties do. They turn finance into innings. Some of the leverage was literal. Millions of fans moving through the gates. The business of a dynasty underwrites the baseball of a dynasty. And in 2025, the Dodgers crossed the threshold that felt almost mythical in the analytics era. 4,012,470 total attendance, the first 4 million season in franchise history, leading a league that itself reached 71.4 million in paid attendance. MLB's third straight year of growth. You can't draw a straight line from a packed pavilion to a well-spotted slider on the black, but those dots connect anyway. Revenue turns into optionality. Optionality turns into depth. Depth turns into the confidence to play a Game 7 like you've been rehearsing it all year. And then there's the leverage of place. Stadiums don't win series, but they can change the temperature. Dodger Stadium's renovations, hatched ahead of 2020 and refined since, made the old cathedral more kinetic. An open center field plaza, pavilion standing room bands, enclosed bars with bullpen sightlines, better ADA access, and a flow that keeps the building loud without wearing everyone out. Over 81 home dates, that matters. The ballpark became a pressure chamber that doesn't feel oppressive. It feels like a nightly festival with a scoreboard. The impact is daily and cumulative. A little more energy in May, a little less drag in August, a lot more thunder in October. Dynasties are built in 1,000 marginal gains, and sometimes one of the margins is where the beer line lets you hear the count. All of that scaffolding wouldn't mean much without the moments, and the Dodgers supplied them in stereo. 2024 gave us the 2 pivot points that still make a highlight reel feel incomplete without them. Freeman's walk-off slam in Game 1, which reset the emotional geometry of the series, and the Game 5 comeback at Yankee Stadium, which read like an epitaph until it didn't. The narrative power of erasing 5 runs in a clincher doesn't just live in a box score, it lives in opponents' minds. That's what dynasties do to the rest of the league. They make the other dugout feel like the inevitable is always one swing away, and that it probably won't be their swing. 2025 delivered the set piece that dynasties need. The kind of Game 7 that legends can wear for 30 winters. The script had all the old tricks, and a few new ones. Toronto led 4-3 in the 9th. The building swayed like it was trying to push the ball toward history. The Dodgers found a thin seam in the noise. Miguel Rojas lofted a game-tying home run with 2 outs, and all at once the math changed. By the 11th, the game had narrowed to 1 pitch and 1 bat, and Will Smith turned on a heater for the swing the sport will keep replaying. The first extra inning homer to win a winner-take-all World Series game. After that, something older took over. The courage to hand the ball on almost no rest to Yoshinobu Yamamoto, who had already authored a complete game jewel in Game 2 and a 6-inning anchor in Game 6. He finished the last 2 2/3 scoreless, took his third win of the series, the first pitcher to do that since Randy Johnson 2001, and then snapped a double play that ended the season and crowned him World Series MVP. The box score is a museum piece. The managerial decision tree is a seminar in October courage. If the proof is in the hardware, the pattern is in the habits. The Dodgers won because their stars played like billboards and their margins played like co-conspirators. Dave Roberts managed not for narratives, but for outs. The quiet sort of excellence that piles up wins until the only storyline left is the honest one. You saw it in the 2024 bullpen choreography that avoided feeding a hot Yankee bat for the sake of convention. You saw it even more clearly in 2025, when titles became less about textbook roles and more about deploying your best arm at the most important time. Job description, be damned. The way he used Yamamoto in Game 7 wasn't a stunt. It was a thesis statement. The Dodgers would pay full freight for certainty in December, and then use that certainty with aggression in November. That's how dynasties behave, not recklessly, but without fear. And the results were literal. Roberts' team became baseball's first repeat champion in 25 years, a modern echo of back-to-back Yankees lore. Of course, dynasties are never only about the 2 weeks the world watches. They are about the 9 months the world glances at. They're about the Tuesday games in Phoenix when a rookie looks like he belongs, because the development pipeline is a conveyor belt, not a lottery ticket. They're about the 9th reliever you trust in July, because the 8th had a family emergency, and the 7th is on the IL, and the 6th is pitching the 7th inning at AAA just in case. They're about the way a front office can summon optionality from a spreadsheet, and then refuse to be precious about it on the field. Ohtani's deferrals weren't just clever, they were functional. They translated into Yamamoto at the top of the rotation, into bench bats that turned matchups into math problems, into an organization that never had to panic trade for the 26th man. The Dodgers spent big where it mattered and spent smart where it counted. That is the industrial design of a dynasty. There's also the part you can't model, the way repeatability changes a team's relationship to pressure. In 2024, Los Angeles exercised an idea that the 2020 title existed in a separate weather system. In 2025, they learned to breathe at altitude. That's not hubris, it's acclimation. The climb got steeper, the oxygen got thinner, and the Dodgers kept moving like the ridge belonged to them. Watch Will Smith's trot in Toronto. That is not the run of a man surprised by what just happened. It's the run of a team that had rehearsed the moment without daring to jinx it. You can call that swagger if you want. Dynasties call it posture. Even the way the sport talked about them changed. The morning after Game 7, the words were less about the opponent and more about the pattern. The Associated Press wrote the Dodgers into the front of the century's short list. First back-to-back since 1999 to 2000. First National League repeat since the 75-76 Reds. And a montage of firsts and few ofs that make broadcasters reach for their superlatives. Reuters pinned the climax to a single man's nerve. Yamamoto's cool, his 1.02 ERA across the series, the third win that pulled a thread straight back to 2001. It's not that headlines decide anything, it's that they're a mirror, and the reflection had finally matched the feeling. So what makes a modern dynasty? In this telling, it's 4 pillars holding up the same roof. First, proof. Rings in consecutive years, in an era designed to prevent them. Second, process. A roster architecture that bends money and development toward depth rather than just dazzle. Third, place. A ballpark that became a competitive resource and a fan base that showed up 4 million strong to charge the nightly atmosphere. And fourth, posture. A manager and a clubhouse that make aggressive, unsentimental choices when the calendar demands them. Put those together, and you get something that can withstand the sport's weather. The Dodgers didn't luck into a warm front. They built a house that handles storms. There will be time later for dissection, for tracing the line from the Andrew Freeman front office shift to the late 2020s machine, for examining how the Ohtani and Yamamoto contracts are going to echo well into the 2030s, for understanding why Dodger Stadium feels like both a museum and a megaphone. For now, it's enough to recognize what the last 2 Octobers already proved. The Dodgers don't merely win, they repeat. They do it under rules that punish long-term excellence. They do it with a style that looks less like a hot streak and more like a template. Listen again for the stadium hush, that second or two after the last out, when the building waits to be told what just happened. In 2024, the hush felt like resolution. In 2025, it sounded like recognition. That's the sound a dynasty makes. The quiet right before the era realizes it belongs to you. Blueprint of a powerhouse. Freeman, Roberts, and the culture. Baseball makes a habit of humbling your grand ideas. Every plan looks elegant in January. By June, the bullpen has sprung 2 leaks. Your number. 3-hitter has a nagging oblique, and 3 rookies are learning the difference between AAA timing and Major League malice. In that landscape, culture is not a poster. It's the set of decisions that keep you from drowning in the middle. The Dodgers turned that into an operating system. If you want the precise calendar square where the blueprint started to change shape, you can pin it to October 14th, 2014. That's the day Andrew Freeman left Tampa Bay's Wizard Shop and walked into Chavez Ravine to take a brand new title, President of Baseball Operations, with a remit that implied both latitude and accountability. He was 37, freshly imported from an organization that manufactured wins on a tightrope, and he arrived with a finance brain and a taste for optionality. It wasn't austerity, it was discipline. The best way to see that doctrine is to look at how the Dodgers spend and how they wait. On one hand, there's the willingness to write checks for certainty when the market produces a talent you cannot replicate internally. That's how you get Yoshinobu Yamamoto on a 12-year, $325 million commitment, plus a posting fee cover charge, and no deferrals at all. That wasn't clever accounting, it was clarity. The Dodgers bought a pillar and paid like one. On the other hand, there's the willingness to engineer a contract so radical that it effectively manufactures more present tense budget. Shohei Ohtani's 10-year, $700 million agreement in December 2023 arrived with a deferral structure the league had never seen. He would take $68 million of his $70 million average annual salary and push it into the future, leaving $2 million per year during the contract, with the deferred chunk paid without interest from 2034 to 2043. In plainer language, the greatest two-way draw on Earth crushed his own near-term CBT footprint to give the Dodgers oxygen now. The club then used that oxygen immediately on Yamamoto and on the layers beneath him. That juxtaposition is the Freeman fingerprint. Pay full freight when you must, and pay in present value savings when a unicorn lets you. But the cultural blueprint is more than the balance sheet. It's also the dugout, where Dave Roberts has made a decade of stress look like meditation. Roberts took the job in 2016 and inherited a franchise already pointed uphill. He turned incline into rhythm. By March 2025, the organization removed all ambiguity about who would steward the next phase, handing Roberts a 4-year extension through 2029. The numbers on the press releases talk about dollars and years. The subtext talks about trust. You don't guarantee that much term to a skipper unless you believe his operating tempo is part of the competitive edge. Roberts' value shows up in the places October doesn't always illuminate. It's there in the quiet hooks. The decision to remove a starter, one batter earlier than custom demands, because the third-time penalty is shimmering just ahead. It's there in the pre-planned pinch run that flip turns a 7th inning from coin flip to leverage inning. It's there in his appetite for role fluidity, the acceptance that your best arm might be your starter on one day's rest when a season is sitting on a ledge. That last trait became the thesis sentence of Game 7 in 2025 at Rogers Center. Roberts called for Yoshinobu Yamamoto out of the bullpen less than 24 hours after a heavy workload and rode 2 2/3 scoreless to the finish line, a decision that only looks obvious in hindsight because the plan worked, when Will Smith had already homered in the 11th and Miguel Rojas had tied it in the 9th. The managerial leverage point was clear. Get the outs from the best arm available. Job title be damned. Culture also means living with October's randomness while reducing its surface area. Part of the Dodgers' reduction is depth as a policy. That starts upstream with scouting and player development geared toward plug-and-play competence. The Dodgers rarely ask a rookie to be a savior. They ask him to be ready. The front office's preference for positional flexibility and platoon leverage makes Roberts' daily lineup a bit like a puzzle with multiple correct answers. It's less about discovering a hero and more about removing losing edges. You can see the effect in the way regular seasons stabilize even when an injury wave hits. The club reaches into Oklahoma City and pulls out competence, or rotates through bench bats without the offense going flat. That habit, the habit of always having another competent player, is not romantic. It is devastating. If you prefer the proof written in October rather than May, the consecutive rings make the argument fast. The 2025 title was not a victory lap, it was an exam, and the Dodgers passed because their systems could tolerate shock. Toronto led 4-3 in the 9th of Game 7. That's the exact slope where panic lives. Instead, Los Angeles kept its pulse. Rojas tied it. Smith flipped it with the first extra inning home run to win a winner-take-all World Series game. Yamamoto erased the last 9 outs like he had a plane to catch. Culture isn't what you say in March. It's what you do with your best pitcher on 0 days rest in November. Of course, none of that exists without the long arc habits Freeman imported and the front office scaled. The Freeman way is not a single trick so much as a set of reflexes. Prefer options to declarations. Keep future leverage even as you solve the present. Spend heavy when the marginal certainty is worth more than the marginal prospect. That's Yamamoto. Extract present value relief when a transcendent player lets you bend the spreadsheet to buy more wins now. That's Ohtani. Feed the system constantly. You can watch those reflexes compound. Ohtani's unprecedented deferrals didn't only make for viral headlines. They created budgetary headroom that immediately turned into more pitching, more bench value, and more flexibility at the deadline. Likewise, the Yamamoto commitment is a statement about where the Dodgers locate certainty. A 12-year term with no deferrals is not a hedge. It's a declaration that the top of the rotation is the scaffolding under everything else. Even the way Los Angeles rewards its steward fits the blueprint. The 4-year extension for Roberts isn't a gold watch. It's the franchise speaking in contract language. The clubhouse pulse is a competitive asset. In the modern game, coherent decision-making at the helm is worth as much as a mid-rotation upgrade. October magnifies seams. Roberts, over time, has stitched them up. There's a temptation to imagine that culture is the speeches you remember. In a 162-game sport, it's the friction you remove. Consider how the Dodgers handle roles. They don't fetishize the save statistic enough to let it handcuff them in a Game 7. They don't force the same player into the same lineup slot in October if the matchup matrix points elsewhere. They're willing to elevate a bench bat into a higher leverage plate appearance because the shape of the inning demands it. They also keep the clubhouse temperature warm. There's an art to asking superstars to be both inevitable and generous, to ask role players to be both ready and patient. Roberts has walked that line long enough that the behavior looks native. And because culture has a business card, we should mention the signals the franchise sends outward. When you detonate the attendance record in 2025, 4,012,470 in paid attendance, you're not just describing demand, you're defining a nightly environment that feeds the team's identity. It is easier to keep a clubhouse focused when 50,000 people bob with you every night. It's easier to keep the roster elastic when the budget lets you treat the 26th man like a chess piece, not a thrift store purchase. Yes, this is culture too. The ability to turn fan energy into financial flexibility into baseball choices. Still, the blueprint would be incomplete without the small, unglamorous rituals that never trend. It's the rehab assignments that don't get rushed because the calendar is loud. It's the pitch design meeting in July that unearths a grip tweak that later steals an October at-bat. It's the way the club treats failure as feedback, not indictment, such that a reliever can survive 2 bad outings without the season turning brittle. Those aren't slogans, they're habits, and habits harden into identity. Does a dynasty require a philosophy? The 2 crowns answer yes, but the philosophy here is more a geometry than a manifesto. The Dodgers try to widen the number of scenarios in which they can win. Sometimes that widening is done with money, Yamamoto. Sometimes it's done with math, Ohtani's deferrals. Sometimes it's done with nerve, Game 7, Yamamoto on 0 days rest. Sometimes it's done with faith. A rookie on a Sunday who looks composed because someone in player dev saw a future that was ready on time. You add those widenings up over a decade, and the path through October goes from razor's edge to something closer to a boardwalk. You can still fall, but it takes more wind. The cleanest case for the blueprint is the part that gets carved into the trophy, back to back. The Dodgers did it in an era that is designed to prevent it. And the way they did it, from Freddie Freeman's 2024 curtain raiser, the first walk-off grand slam in World Series history, to the 2025 finishing kick, Will Smith in the 11th, Yamamoto's third win, and MVP, game-ending double play, looks less like happenstance and more like process. So when you ask what Dodgers culture is, set aside the slogans and look at the ledger. Leadership with a plan. A manager with tenure and teeth. Contract engineering as roster strategy. A playoff posture. Put all of that on a whiteboard and it looks like a business school project. Put it on a field for 2 straight Octobers and it looks like a dynasty. The Dodgers didn't stumble into a golden window. They designed one, bolted it into the wall, and then built a habit of opening it just as the air turns cold. Stagecraft at Chavez Ravine, stadium, crowds, and the money machine. Baseball stadiums are supposed to be backdrops. They set the scene, frame the light, and get out of the way. Dodger Stadium never quite agreed to that contract. It was always the most photogenic character in the story. That terraced bowl arranged against the dusty shoulders of the San Gabriels. Those palm trees that look like punctuation marks in the sky. The late-day lavender that can make a routine warm-up look like a painting. In the Dodgers' modern run, the ballpark did something more audacious. It didn't merely host a dynasty, it powered one. That truth is easiest to see on a cool September night when the game is still theoretical. 90 minutes to first pitch, music looping at just the right volume. Kids in brand new Ohtani 17 jerseys pulling their parents toward the center field gates like magnets. They're not just early, they're arriving to something. A plaza that didn't exist here not so long ago, a ring of sightlines and standing room ledges, bridges and elevators that stitch the old geometry into a walkable loop, and glassed-in bars where you can watch a reliever stretch on a mound that used to be hidden in the seams of the park. That wasn't an accident of aging gracefully. It was a $100 million pre-2020 renovation whose centerpiece was the new center field plaza and an overhaul of the outfield pavilions. Enclosed bars with bullpen views, standing room decks atop the pavilions, enhanced ADA seating, upgraded restrooms, and even home run seats just beyond the wall. The club said it plainly when they announced the plan in 2019. The plaza would serve as a front door, and the pavilions would stop being islands and become part of a 360-degree experience. The upgrades did what the blueprints promised, and then some. The park learned how to flow. If you've spent a summer night here recently, you know the sensation. There's less friction in your feet and more baseball in your ears. The bridges yoke the outfield bands to the rest of the bowl, so the crowd can circulate without losing the thread of the inning. The elevators shuttle families and grandparents to the plaza and back without treating mobility like an obstacle course. The bullpen glass turns a passive lull into a living exhibit. Bullpen coach, stretching bands, the quick snap of a warm-up slider thudding into a mitt just beyond your nachos. The stadium breathes with you now. It's a subtle thing until it isn't, until the building has been alive for 3 hours on a Wednesday, and then, in the 7th, decides to become a weather system. That matters because the Dodgers didn't just need a place to play during this era. They needed an engine to convert attention into energy, and energy into margins. The sports economics don't draw straight lines from concession sales to win probability, but the dots absolutely connect. Start with the most obvious metric of a living machine: bodies. In 2025, the Dodgers did something that hadn't been done since 2008, and that only 9 teams in MLB history had accomplished before them. They drew more than 4 million fans in a season, finishing with 4,012,470 at an average of 49,537 per game. They were the first MLB team to touch 4 million since the Yankees and Mets in the last year of the old New York stadiums, and they were the 10th club ever to cross the threshold. That's not a curiosity, it's a budget line and a psychological drum. The club's own roundup put sharper edges on it. The Dodgers hit 2 million fans by their 40th home game, and 3 million by their 60th. Both franchise records then closed the books on the all-time mark. A year earlier, Ohtani's first in Dodger Blue, they had already led the majors at 3,941,251. And they did that even while surrendering a home date to the Seoul/Tokyo Globe-trotting that launches MLB's calendar. In other words, the needle was bending up before 4M. The renovation and the star power just pushed it through the ceiling. Zoom out to the league level and you can see the rising tide the Dodgers surfed and shaped. MLB attendance reached 71.35 million in 2024, the best since 2017, and then ticked up again in 2025 to 71.41 million. The third straight year of growth after the rules overhaul that sped games up and made weeknights feel less like a time tax. The Dodgers led that parade. They weren't just a participant in the improvement, they were its headliners. Reuters Recap packaged it succinctly. Faster game times, bigger crowds, and Los Angeles on top of the turnstile leaderboard with the first 4 million season of the pitch clock era. There's a glamour story embedded in those numbers, of course, and it begins with the winter of 2023 when Shohei Ohtani turned a contract negotiation into a macroeconomic event. But the glamour didn't live only in December headlines. It radiated all the way to March, when MLB took the Dodgers to Tokyo and found out what it looks like when a global superstar debuts for a global brand in a global time slot. The Tokyo series opener averaged 25 plus million viewers in Japan, the most watched MLB game ever there, and merchandise sales detonated league records by triple digits. A few days later, AP tallied it the same way. Record audience, Ohtani jerseys everywhere, and a sense that the Dodgers had become both a baseball team and a traveling festival. You felt the reverberation when the caravan returned to Chavez Ravine. The park didn't just swell, it vibrated. If you want to graft those vibrations directly onto the Dodgers' competitive identity, walk through a few innings of the 2024 and 2025 runs with new eyes and ears, specifically ears attached to 49,000 other people. When Freddie Freeman hit that Game 1 walk-off grand slam in the 2024 World Series, the sound wasn't only catharsis, it was practice. The park had been building toward that texture all year, gathering throat and breath and timing with every sellout that didn't feel like a special occasion anymore. When they pulled off the 7-6 clincher in the Bronx 5 days later, a different sound completed the loop. Television ratings that soared to the most watched World Series game since 2019, with over 21 million at peak and LA pulling a 21.1 rating at home. The ballpark builds the team's posture. The audience pays it back in national resonance. But the real engine is in the ways a stadium's design and a fan base's habits feed baseball decisions. The center field plaza and the pavilion decks don't just look good on drone shots. They keep the crowd in the game on the move. That's the difference between a loud 2-strike count in the third and a sustained loudness that makes a 7th inning plate appearance feel heavier than the numbers on a lineup card. The bullpen views aren't just cool, they make warm-up a spectator event. When a visiting hitter glances out and reads the room, sees 1,000 faces watch a reliever pop a mitt 3 times, he's not looking at architecture, he's looking at pressure. The players feel it, even if they pretend they don't. Managers feel it, even if they won't say it out loud. And if you're Dave Roberts, you use it. A quick hook here, because your fresh arm is already electrically tuned. By the concourse, a pinch hitter there because the matchups say so, and the building says go. All of that still sounds like vibes until you follow the money. Not just the gate, though the gate is massive, but the concentric rings of revenue that a 4 million fan season and a global brand produce. The postseason pool tells a sliver of that story in hard numbers. In 2024, MLB's total player pool hit a record $129.1 million, with the champion Dodgers slicing out $46.47 million to distribute in shares and awards. Shares don't fund free agents, owners do. But the scale of October's receipts is a reminder that a ballpark is also a financial instrument, and that being on TV deep into November, with a stadium that feels like a festival every night, compounds the effect. You can see it in how the Dodgers behave. They do not nickel and dime the 24th or 26th roster spots. They run a player development machine in Oklahoma City that is less lifeboat and more shuttle. They buy certainty at the top of the rotation and still carry a bench that can turn a series in the 6th. Those are cultural choices. They are also budgetary choices. One of the quiet benefits of the renovation is how it made the stadium more honest. The place used to have glamorous dead zones, beautiful but isolated. Now the spaces have jobs. The kids running in circles on the outfield grass concourse aren't missing the inning. They're a backdrop to it. The friends catching up behind right field aren't opting out of the moment. They're leaning in. The family on the bridge that links the pavilion decks to the rest of the stadium isn't cutting a corner. They're finishing a loop. When you multiply those micro experiences by 4 million, the macro story writes itself. More time on site, more money in the till, more noise in the air, more chances for a random June game to feel like a dress rehearsal for October. The Dodgers also weaponize predictability. The 2025 schedule wasn't just a calendar, it was a metronome. The average home crowd baked the adrenaline into the nightly routine. The 49,000-ish hum that can wake up a flat Tuesday or stretch the life of a 2-run lead on a Saturday. Pitchers learn to hold the ball a half second longer as the hands go up behind them. Hitters learn that a 2-strike battle has a second audience perched over the bullpens. And because the park is walkable in a way it never quite was before, the loud keeps finding you no matter where you stand. A dynasty needs that. Not flashbulb noise, but durable noise. It would be easy to declare the whole thing a triumph of bricks and bodies and leave it at that. But the stadium's transformation and the attendance surge worked in tandem with a strategic posture that treats optionality as the Dodgers' house religion. The vastness of the crowd and the modernity of the building help finance the roster. That's the obvious part, and they justify risk. There's a reason Los Angeles could sign Yoshinobu Yamamoto, to a 12-year, $325 million pact with no deferrals and a $50 million signing bonus paid up front, while a week earlier agreeing to Shohei Ohtani's 10-year, $700 million deal structured with never-before-seen deferrals. Those are not wild bets. They're infrastructural bets. They assume that the machine, the one that fills the pavilions and keeps the concourse lively and beams a global brand into Tokyo living rooms, will keep humming. And they assume that the humming will matter in late October when the Dodgers ask their best pitcher to jog out of the bullpen on one day's rest and finish a season without a net. That part worked too. And still, for all the spreadsheets the ballpark can animate, the most powerful thing it manufactures is the impression of inevitability. Other clubs talk about it. Here you can hear it. It's in the way a full pavilion plays a fly ball, calling to it, almost, and then detonates when the glove closes. It's in the two-out murmur that feels like a pressure cooker about to whistle, in the organ that can tease a smile out of a bad count, in the way 50,000 people will hold their breath exactly the same way, on a 3-2 slider to a right-hander. Baseball is a quiet game until it absolutely isn't. Dodger Stadium has learned to make those flips on command. You could measure the flip in the 2024 World Series, when the building taught the night to behave. That Game 1 walk-off was a swing of history, yes, but it was also a crowd control experiment that ended with the lab coats nodding to one another. The plaza fills early, the concourses keep the current moving, the bullpens have spectators before the anthem, and when the pitch arrives, that will live forever. There's no lag, no late arriving, no wandering back, just a collective inhale and a ball on a line, and a sound that feels like metal becoming light. You could measure it again in 2025, when the Dodgers spent an entire summer turning 49,000 into a habit, and then took that habit on the road to Toronto, where a different building screamed at them and found out that a team that lives in noise can play through anyone else's. That's the exportable part of a home field edge. You carry the posture with you. There's a cynical reading available here, that money buys everything, and that a postcard stadium is the most obvious money printing device in sports. But that reading misses how purposefully this version of Dodger Stadium was aimed at baseball outcomes. The upgrades didn't build luxury boxes in the clouds. They brought the center of gravity closer to the field. They didn't wall off the bullpens. They turned them into shared air. They didn't scatter amenities for the sake of amenities. They located them along the lines where fan energy could be captured and recycled back into the inning. This is not a mall with a diamond in the middle. It's a diamond with a festival wrapped around it, a cathedral that sings on command. If you're looking for the hard-edged proof that this singing shows up in the ledger, remember what the league wrote down after the 2024 and 2025 seasons. Attendance rising across MLB post-rules changes, the Dodgers leading the column both years. Television audiences peaking when Los Angeles plays a clincher. International broadcasts smashing records when Los Angeles travels. Postseason pools setting new highs with Los Angeles at the center. Those are not vibes. Those are receipts. So call the place what it is in this story. Not a postcard, not a museum, not merely a ballpark. It is stagecraft, designed with intention to make every night feel like the prologue to October, and every October feel inevitable. A dynasty is 1,000 small advantages that add up to again. In Los Angeles, one of those advantages is a bowl of concrete that learned to breathe like a living thing. and to shout at precisely the right moments. From 2013 to the cusp, learning to win every year. Dynasties don't usually start with coronations. They start with repetitions, the prosaic kind, the kind you could miss if you only pay attention in October. In Los Angeles, the new era started as a habit and then became a reputation. They're still there. From 2013 forward, the Dodgers made moving day in the National League West feel like a holiday they had trademarked. Before they stacked 2024 and 2025 into back-to-back rings, they built the muscle needed to keep climbing. Before there were parades, there were streaks. You can draw the line back to the first of those modern banners, 2013, when a starry roster found its pace in midsummer and never really returned it. What followed was the part of the story that looks almost boring until you realize how rare it is. Division titles as ritual. 8 straight from 2013 to 2020. A run that, for a time, made the NL West feel more like a measuring stick than a race. And then, after one temporary interruption by a 107-win Giants team in 2021, a resumption of normal programming in 2022 and 2023, and as 2025 wound down, the brink of 12 division titles in 13 seasons. The phrasing isn't puffery. It's the way national wires wrote it up as the Dodgers pushed to clinch late in September 2025, 12 in 13. That's the geography of a dynasty. You redraw the map, and everyone else has to drive by your landmarks. But a standings page can't explain how a habit becomes an era. For that, you need to zoom in on the architecture. Who drew it? Who lived in it? Which shocks it survived? And how the lessons hardened into choices. The architectural date stamp is October 14th, 2014. That morning, the Dodgers did something only a few rich clubs ever attempt. They hired discipline. Andrew Freeman, the young executive who had turned the low-budget Rays into a menace, walked into Chavez Ravine as president of baseball operations. The Los Angeles Times headline made it plain. Dodgers hire Andrew Freeman to head baseball operations. Within weeks, front office chairs were being moved to make space for a new build. Ned Colletti shifted upstairs. The org chart stretched to accommodate a new general manager, and the message was sent without a syllable of romance. Spend big, think bigger. A template emerged. The Dodgers would be aggressive in the market, but conservative with leverage. They would hunt for optionality, the corporate word that, translated to baseball, means more than one workable path through a crisis. Over 10 seasons, that doctrine produced a peculiar calm. You could see it on random Tuesdays in May, when a rookie was asked to be competent rather than magical. You could feel it in September, when the rotation rearranged itself like a train, switching tracks without the shriek. And you could measure it when the club absorbed October heartbreak without tearing up the blueprint. Those heartbreaks are part of the curriculum, and the Dodgers took the full course load. In 2017, after 104 wins and a wide-open window, they pushed the World Series to Game 7, a tense, late autumn night in Los Angeles that ended in a 5-1 loss to the Astros. The line score looks simple now. It wasn't simple then, and it certainly wasn't soft. The Dodgers learned 2 hard truths that postseason. October does not care how cleanly you solved April, and a 7-game series can make a juggernaut look mortal in a matter of hours. The next year, they came back anyway, which is a lesson by itself. 2018 ended with the Red Sox on the field at Dodger Stadium, a 4-1 series that read like an epilogue to a summer where Los Angeles never fully shook a sense of incompleteness. The night the title slipped away, Game 5, a 5-1 Boston win, the building felt more resigned than stunned. Sometimes the sport tells you the gap and dares you to close it later. The Dodgers filed away another note. To win in November, you need a lineup that can flex against elite pitching without waiting for one man to thaw a cold night. 2019 was different, and for many worse. A 106-win steamroller that got ambushed in the NLDS by a Nationals team that would not waste an inch of runway that October. You could call it bad luck. The Dodgers had other words for it in private, none printable. The lesson changed again. It isn't enough to build a great team. You have to build one that solves bad weeks. So they kept adding layers. Their answer looked less like a headline and more like a series of reflexes. Relentless roster depth, a bench that offered matchup solutions instead of placeholders, a player development pipeline that kept the taxi squad from feeling like a fire drill. And in 2020, when the sport sprinted through a compressed season, the Dodgers proved that their operating system translated to any calendar. They won it all. That title was loud in the moment and weirdly quiet in memory, not because it mattered less, but because it became a preface to what the fan base and the team were still hunting. Unarguable full season proof. The club would spend the next 4 seasons forcing baseball's jury to reach a unanimous verdict. Along the way, they produced a regular season that doubled as a sermon. The 2022 Dodgers won 111 games, the most in the majors since the 2001 Mariners, and the most in the National League since the 1906 Cubs. That's a number with dust on it, the kind you see in museum cases. It also came with an NLDS loss to the Padres, a reminder that dominance over 6 months can still be undone in a week if you leave too many runs in the dugout. The stat, though, is still a stone in the dynasty wall. When you reach 111, you aren't just good. You're operating at the edge of what the league allows. This is where the Freeman doctrine of present value clarity met the reality of an arms race. The winter of 2023 was a hinge. In one dizzy week, the Dodgers perfected the trick of spending both heavily and cleverly. Shohei Ohtani agreed to 10 years and $700 million, then folded almost all of it into the future via unprecedented interest-free deferrals, roughly $68 million deferred annually. A structure that slashed the present value used to calculate luxury tax hits. A few days later, Yoshinobu Yamamoto arrived on a 12-year, $325 million pact that did the opposite. No deferrals, a massive signing bonus booked in year 1, and a posting fee to Oryx for the privilege of paying market price for a pillar. The two deals read like opposite pages of the same playbook. Take oxygen where unicorn allows it. Spend full freight where October demands it. Even before the repeat crowns, that pairing was the clearest expression of how the Dodgers had learned to win every year, by making December decisions that anticipated November pressure. The margin between very good and dynastic is measured in how you metabolize shocks. Consider 2025, which asked Los Angeles to win differently, less like a parade and more like a pilgrimage. The season had the look of a strong team, keeping its balance on a rolling deck. Enough injuries and weird stretches to make the standings sticky. Enough resilience to keep the club moving forward. By late September, they were within a single win of clinching the NL West again, with National Wire copy framing the accomplishment exactly how we did above, on the verge of their 12th division title in 13 seasons. Even the way the Dodgers approached that stretch revealed the system's hum. Different heroes, a bench player here, a prospect there, and a bullpen that might feature a household name for an inning and then a lifer on the next night. The effect was a team that absorbs variance, not just survives it. Of course, the difference in public memory always lives in October, and that's where the learning to win every year arc writes in permanent ink. The Dodgers 2024 postseason, bracket tightrope and all, felt like a decade finally spending its interest. They didn't spasm when the ball hopped wrong. They made time. They didn't lunge at the wrong pitch because the stadium was yowling. They worked counts until the inning came to them. The Yankees provided the operatic backdrop and the easy storyline. The Dodgers wrote a quieter one in 5 acts, capped by a clincher on the road that felt less like a heist and more like confirmation. If you want the memory hook, it's Freddie Freeman, who reordered the World Series with a walk-off grand slam in Game 1 and then took home the MVP. If you want the process, it's the way the Dodgers never ran out of competent players to put in the correct matchup at the correct time. You'd only raise 5-0 in the Bronx without both. And 2025, that was the year they passed the class titled Repetition in an era that hates it. The NL West was theirs again. The October path was a little angrier, and the World Series demanded a Game 7 on the road that will live a long time in highlight packages. You know the final tableau. Miguel Rojas tying it in the 9th. Will Smith uncorking the first extra inning home run ever to win a winner-take-all World Series game in the 11th. And Yoshinobu Yamamoto on 1 day's rest, finishing 2 2/3 scoreless for his 3rd win of the series and the MVP. But the preface was written over 12 summers. A team built to handle any inning asked for that inning, and delivered it. The broadcast numbers the next morning told you how many people recognized the moment for what it was. The largest Game 7 audience since 2017. But the only number that mattered inside the clubhouse was 2. Rings consecutive. If you're assembling the syllabus for how to become a dynasty without looking like a movie, the Dodgers 2013 to the cusp chapter supplies the lecture notes. Normalize the abnormal. Winning a division 8 straight times, 2013 to 2020, isn't a trick of fortune. It's the compounded effect of removing losing edges over 162. The Dodgers made it look mundane. The encyclopedia pages make it stark. A franchise that, by 2025, sits on 9 World Series titles and a stack of division banners that keeps growing. Hire process and let it breathe. Freeman's arrival in 2014 was a statement that a big market can buy stars and patience. The Times piece that morning reads almost mild by hindsight, just a hiring announcement. But it marked the moment Los Angeles decided to make optionality its house religion. Treat failure as feedback. 2017 and 2018 did not break the machine. 2019 didn't either. They refined the specs. The team that lost Game 7 to Houston and 5 games to Boston came back not angrier, but wiser. A distinction you can see in how they approach bullpen roles, platoon leverage, and deadline spending thereafter. Prove the floor before you raise the ceiling. That's what 111 wins in 2022 are. Proof of a floor so high that even a bad October can't erase the message about organizational quality. It also taught a final, necessary humility, that even the cleanest 6 months don't buy you a week. Use contracts as tools, not trophies. Ohtani's deferrals and Yamamoto's no deferral pillar were not contradictions. They were complementary parts of the same plan. Together, they made the roster deeper in June and braver in November. Keep learning in public. Fans don't always get to see the 1,000 micro choices behind a 7th-inning hook or a pinch runner in the 8th. But over these 12 seasons, Los Angeles made those choices with a calm born of rehearsal. The 2024 title ended an argument. The 2025 title ended doubt. In that light, the cusp isn't a single afternoon. It's the stretch of road where you realize the car you've been tuning for a decade is now ready to win a cross-country race twice in a row. By late 2025, the Dodgers had driven past the last skeptical mile marker, the one that said, "Nice regular seasons," and into the part of the map where streets get named after moments. The address reads like this: from 2013's first step to 2025's last out, a franchise learned to make every year look familiar enough that the unfamiliar feat, repeating, felt like the logical next line in a paragraph they've been writing since the day they hired an architect to put the walls in the right places. And that's the secret thread that runs from the early division streaks through the 111-win sermon and into those final 2 Novembers. Continuity as intent. The Dodgers didn't stumble into an era. They constructed one, reinforcing it with the sort of decisions that make Tuesdays easy so that Saturdays in October can be merely difficult. When the sport finally presented them with a window framed by the Yankees on one side and Game 7 in Toronto on the other, they weren't peeking through. They were already inside, measuring the walls, planning room for another banner. That's how you learn to win every year. You build a house that fits again. The $700 million fulcrum, Shohei Ohtani, changes everything. Every dynasty has a hinge, a moment when a great organization becomes something heavier, harder to move, more gravitational than the math seems to allow. For the Dodgers, that hinge wasn't a walk-off, a trade deadline, or even a parade. It was a signature. 10 years, $700 million, and a structure so audacious that it turned the contract into an operating system. The headline was the kind you remember where you were when you first scrolled past it. Shohei Ohtani to the Dodgers. 10 years, $700 million. That's the fireworks version. The blueprint lives in the footnotes. Ohtani agreed to defer $68 million of his $70 million annual salary, leaving only $2 million per year paid during the 2024 to 2033 seasons, with a deferred $680 million paid without interest from 2034 through 2043. In the language of front offices, that collapses the present value, i.e., the number that matters for the competitive balance tax, and creates immediate breathing room around the sport's biggest star. In the language of a clubhouse, it means the team gets to keep buying certainty, while the most marketable player on earth is in the lineup every night. That structure wasn't a caper, it was a choice. MLB's rules allow deep deferrals. Ohtani volunteered to use them like a lever so Los Angeles could keep stacking talent. It worked in exactly the way it was designed. Within days, the Dodgers closed the other half of the winter that changed the decade. Yoshinobu Yamamoto, 12 years, $325 million, plus a posting fee north of $50 million to Oryx, and no deferrals at all. In other words, Ohtani's present value lightness enabled a second, heavy, full freight bet where the club wanted absolute certainty at the very top of the rotation in October to come. If the finance is the skeleton, the muscle was everything Ohtani did the moment he put on Dodger blue. Even as a hitter, only in 2024, while his elbow rehabbed, his presence redrew the defensive geometry around Mookie Betts and Freddie Freeman, turning the first three spots in the order into a machine that forced pitchers to pick the poison they liked least. The scoreboard tells that story in box score font. The city tells it in a different register. The Dodgers were already a national team. With Ohtani, they became an international broadcast that just happened to play 81 times in a canyon. You could feel the scope of that upgrade before a single home date. MLB's decision to stage the Tokyo series with Ohtani's Dodgers made intuitive sense. A global superstar returning to Japan in a Dodger uniform is more than a game. It's a cultural event. The numbers made it official. More than 25 million average viewers in Japan for the opener, the most watched MLB game in the country's history, followed by 23+ million for Game 2, making the two-game set the most watched MLB series ever in Japan. Merchandise blown through the roof, fan fest attendance like a civic holiday, and a reminder that Los Angeles had become the sport's most potent export. And when the caravan came back from Asia, Chavez Ravine answered with something you can count at the turnstiles. The Dodgers didn't just lead MLB attendance. They did something nobody had managed since 2008. They crossed the 4 million line. 4,012,470 paid, 49,537 per game, a club record and the league's standard bearer in 2025. It wasn't a blip. It was the culmination of a curve that bent upward the moment the ink dried through 2024's league-leading 3.94 million and straight into a franchise first. That is not just atmosphere, it's infrastructure. The kind that pays for depth, sustains patience, and underwrites the kind of October risk that wins a Game 7. If you want a simple way to picture the Ohtani effect on the field, start with innings and end with options. A lineup with Betts setting the table, Freeman controlling the middle, and Ohtani darkening the on-deck circle creates innings that last longer than scouting reports. Managers hesitate to burn their best reliever in the 7th when they know the 8th belongs to the constellation. Star power isn't just highlight reels, it's the removal of bad choices. The knock-on effects reach everywhere. The 5-hole gets better pitches, the bench gets matchups instead of prayers. The bullpen inherits more leads of the 2-run variety, which changes how aggressively you can use leverage arms. None of that shows up in a single number. All of it shows up in October. Off the field, Ohtani's structure changed how the Dodgers could think about time. The club didn't need to spend July hoarding prospects out of fear of a payroll cliff. They could spend July solving problems. They didn't have to treat the 26th man like a thrift store purchase. They could treat him like a living chess piece. The ability to keep payroll flexible while carrying the sport's brightest star is an organizational dream. The Dodgers made it a line item. MLB's own explainer spells out the guts of the deferrals. CBS mirrored the detail and added the obvious conclusion. The shape of Ohtani's money is a team-building tool. That kind of leverage has a feedback loop, and you can hear it in the building. Dodger Stadium, already rejuvenated by a 9-figure renovation that opened up the outfield and turned the center field plaza into a festival, became a nightly drumline once Ohtani arrived. It helps when your team is this good. It helps more when your superstar turns a Tuesday into an event. The league's macro numbers tell you the sport is surging. 71.4 million total attendance in 2025, third straight year of growth. But the micro story lives in Los Angeles. The game feels shorter, the crowd feels bigger, and the lineup feels like something you plan your commute around. Reuters put the math plainly. MLB up, Dodgers first, 4 million through the gate. And the Dodgers themselves documented the milestones. 2 million by the 40th home date, 3 million by the 60th, finishing with a franchise record on the 81st. There's a tactical echo to all of this that showed up when the calendar mattered most. In 2024, with Ohtani hitting only, the Dodgers erased the last stale talking point by beating the Yankees in 5, getting the kind of Freddie Freeman performance that makes a World Series MVP feel inevitable and a Game 1 swing that will live for decades. The first walk-off grand slam in World Series history. Think about how that night sets the stage for the week that follows. The opponent sleeps under a highlight they can't unsee. Your staff manages from ahead. Your lineup spends the rest of the series batting with oxygen. That's not all Ohtani. That's everyone. But Ohtani's gravity helps the whole system find the spots where baseball tilts. Then, 2025 took the Ohtani thesis and expanded it. The Tokyo proof of concept that the Dodgers are now a global show, paired with a summer that felt like a residency. 49,000 strong, night after night, treating each homestand like chapters in an album you can hum without checking the track list. And when the postseason turned theatrical, Los Angeles had the layers a dynasty needs. Will Smith in the 11th in Toronto, Miguel Rojas in the 9th before that, and, crucially, the freedom to deploy Yamamoto on one day's rest to close the book in Game 7, because a roster built with Ohtani-enabled flexibility could withstand the ripple effects everywhere else. The MVP and the third win in the series went to Yamamoto. The architecture that made the choice possible belongs to the winter Ohtani helped script. It's tempting to file Ohtani's impact under spectacle. Jerseys in 3 alphabets, camera crews on 2 continents, a sea of 17 rippling on the pavilions. But the truer story is quieter and more ruthless. Ohtani turns variance into probability. The deferrals turn expense into optionality. The audience turns home dates into stability. And the combination turns October into a solvable problem more often than the sport usually allows. None of that guarantees anything on any given night. It simply gives you more roads to the last win you need. If you're keeping score in the margins, put these in ink. Deferrals as technology. MLB's own explainer and mainstream breakdowns agree. $68 million per year deferred. $2 million paid annually during the deal, no interest. 2034 to 2043 payout. A structure that shrinks present value and, by extension, the CBT hit. That's not trivia. That's the budget that paid for everything else. Yamamoto as the counterweight. 12 years, $325 million. No deferrals, $50 million plus posting fee. Certainty where it counts most. Purchased immediately after Ohtani's PV compression. The mirror image that makes the winter make sense. Global resonance turned local muscle. 25 million plus average viewers in Japan for the Tokyo opener, a national record. Then 4 million, 12,470 through LA's gates. The first 4 MLB season since 2008, in a league that climbed to 71.4 million overall in 2025. The brand is worldwide. The benefit is nightly. Moments that validate the model. Freeman's walk-off slam to start the 2024 World Series, a series Los Angeles won in 5, and a 2025 October, capped by choices a normal roster can't make. The architecture held when it mattered. Dynasties aren't crowned by accountants, but they're often made possible by them. The Dodgers did what great organizations are supposed to do. When a generational player gives them leverage, they used it. Ohtani didn't only arrive to hit baseballs into the left field pavilion, and later to stand on a mound with the season in his hand. He arrived to deform the problem the Dodgers had been trying to solve for a decade: how to be the best team in the sport and the most flexible, and to give them enough oxygen to make the companion bet on an ace who would end the World Series on one day's rest. That's the hinge. That's the fulcrum. That's the night. The Dodgers turned money into margin, margin into depth, depth into nerve, and nerve into a habit of winning the last game twice. The Yamamoto era begins. Dynasties spend years building scaffolds, development pipelines, cap tables, a manager's nerve. Then, one winter, they hang a bell you can hear from anywhere in the league. For the Dodgers, that bell tolled twice in December 2023. The second peal deeper than the first. Yoshinobu Yamamoto, 12 years. A number so round it sounds ceremonial. $325 million. A sum that felt less like a bid than a declaration. If Shohei Ohtani's deferrals were the lever that created oxygen, Yamamoto was the decision about how to breathe. A frontline ace acquired at full freight, no deferrals, $50 million signing bonus paid in 2024, and a record posting fee wired to Oryx Buffaloes for the privilege of importing inevitability. The sticker price wasn't subtle. It wasn't meant to be. He arrived with laurels that read like a dare. In NPB, Yamamoto won 3 straight Sawamura Awards, the Japanese Cy Young, while sweeping pitching triple crowns and stacking MVPs from 2021 to 2023. He threw 2 no-hitters, closed Oryx's 2022 Japan Series as a champion, and, in his last NPB October, punched out 14 in a complete game classic to set the Japan Series strikeout record that once belonged to Yu Darvish. That's not just dominance, that's choreography, a repertoire built on timing and tempo, a fastball that plays up because hitters are wasting brain cycles on a splitter that seems to vanish like a coin. The rarity wasn't only the resume, it was the structure. Unlike his superstar teammate, Yamamoto didn't feather the present with deferrals. The Dodgers committed clean. 12 years without deferrals, signing bonus now, and the posting fee, reported a hair over $50 million, laid across the threshold to Oryx. In a winter when Los Angeles exploited the CBA's deferral math with one unicorn, it announced with the other that some assets are worth paying at face value. It's a tidy expression of the Freeman doctrine. When certainty is available at the top of a rotation, you don't rent it, you bolt it in. If contracts are architecture, pitching is music, and Yamamoto brought a symphony. The shape of his dominance begins with how the splitter changes hitters' posture. NPB scouting reports read like recipes: ride at the top, gravity at the bottom, and a curveball that doesn't exist to be pretty, so much as to mess with your clock. Ask a scout for the immediate adjustment to MLB, and they'll tell you. The ball is a touch different, the schedule is unromantic, the hitters can file off-speed timing in 2 swings. Ask them what travels, and they'll point to command. Command is a passport. Yamamoto survives customs. The The Dodgers didn't ask him to be mythic in April. They asked him to be inevitable in November, a distinction that matters because it says everything about how Los Angeles frames October now. Their system is built to get to the last week with multiple ways to win. Their stars exist to make the last 2 games feel like a test you've studied for your whole life. And then 2025 arrived, and the Dodgers ran the plan through a furnace. The World Series asked for a memoir, and Yamamoto wrote one in 7 chapters. Game 2 in Toronto was the preface, where the tone declared itself. The splitter behaved like a rug pulled out from under good swings. The fastball seemed to grow in flight, and the strike zone became a suggestion that only he could enforce. Complete game, the kind of postseason artifact you frame in a sport that has turned 9th innings over to committees. He was back to frontman again in Game 6. 6 more taut innings, a scoreboard that never found the bravado to blink first. Then came Game 7, the night that makes a career into canon. Trailing 4-3 in the 9th, the Dodgers tied it on Miguel Rojas' swing. In the 11th, Will Smith spun history with the first extra inning home run ever to win a winner-take-all World Series game. And Yamamoto, on one day's rest, shouldered 2 2/3 scoreless to slam the door. 3rd win of the series, World Series MVP, and the game-ending double play that felt like punctuation from another era. There's a reason that last note matters as more than a trivia hook. The modern bullpen era has convinced us that closers are job titles, not roles. The Dodgers used Yamamoto to remind the sport that leverage is the only job description that counts in November. The last outs belong to your best arm, period, if the structure underneath you can absorb the ripples. This is what a $325 million commitment buys you in the middle of a dynasty, not merely a number, one every 5th day, but a solution on the night when innings feel like iron. The history books added a companion line. First back-to-back champions in 25 years, and the first NL repeat since the Big Red Machine. The precise kind of context that turns great team into modern dynasty. If you want to see the system at work, dissect the choices that made Game 7 possible. In most dugouts, the conversation ends at convention. Starter went deep yesterday, can't touch him. In this dugout, the conversation starts at options. Ohtani's deferrals lowered the present value drag on the CBT. Those savings funded not only Yamamoto, but the layers that make a gamble survivable. A bench that wins matchups, a bullpen that can cover the middle, a defense that turns contact into exits. The result: Roberts could summon a starter on fumes, not as an act of desperation, but as a rational allocation of outs. The reward was a second straight ring and a portrait of a franchise that no longer treats the calendar as a rule book. But before the heroics, there was the assimilation, the quiet calculus of how an NPB ace becomes an MLB pillar. The headlines fawn over velocity. Yamamoto's translation was deception plus decisions. The four-seamers carry plays because the splitter's threat rearranges hitter's gait. The curve changes eye levels. The command means every pitch is a vote for the next one. That profile travels, and the laurels weren't ornamental. 3 straight Sawamuras and triple crowns aren't just medals. They're proof that his plan survives fatigue, scouting, and pressure. Add WBC pedigree, a Japan Series record-smashing farewell, and you get an arm pre-calibrated for big rooms. The Dodgers made the bet that the biggest room of all, a Game 7 on foreign soil, would feel familiar to him once the ball left his hand. They were right. There's a parallel worth drawing here, and the box score invites it. The last pitcher to win 3 games in a single World Series, while also appearing in relief in Game 7, was Randy Johnson in 2001. He took the ball on short rest in the 9th and authored a finish you can still recite. That was a different era, a different offensive environment, a different bullpen theology, which is precisely why the comparison flatters Yamamoto more. He reproduced a throwback feat in a league designed to prevent it, then did it with a repertoire the game barely saw the last time someone pulled it off. When you borrow from legend under conditions that punish legend, the math gets loud. To reduce Yamamoto's effect to October heroism would be to miss the texture of what the Dodgers bought. The contract's no deferral posture wasn't swagger for its own sake. It was a boardroom way of saying the quiet part loud. We are purchasing certainty at the exact place where we want it least exposed to variance. And the posting fee, approximately $50.6 million, a record attached to his signature, is the transactional proof that Los Angeles was paying not merely for WAR in aggregate, but for moment-shaping leverage. It's the difference between a club that can repeat and one that does. Even the narrative framing in the days afterward understood it. Reuters pinned the hinge points. Rojas in the 9th, Smith in the 11th, Yamamoto for 2 2/3 on 1 day's rest. AP layered in the first repeat in 25 years language and recounted how the last 8 pitches felt like an aria of nerves. MLB.com added the catcher's angle. Smith catching every inning of a 73-frame epic and still having the legs to turn on destiny. When storytellers agree on the role you played, you've probably authored something bigger than a box score. Zoom out one more time to see the organizational geometry. Ohtani's deferrals, a $68 million yearly delay, down to $2 million in present salary, paid without interest from 2034 to 2043, squeezed the present value footprint. Yamamoto's no deferral commitment asserted that not every cornerstone should be financed with tomorrow's dollars. Together, they formed a ledger that let the Dodgers spend where certainty matters and save where unicorn allows. If you want to know how a team repeats in a parity era, look less at the parade float and more at the spreadsheet that made Game 7 a choice rather than a crisis. And yet, the reason this chapter belongs in a script and not a case study is the feeling you could not escape in those last outs in Toronto. There was a hush that lives only after long seasons and longer arguments. The last double play ball jumped twice. The last throw popped a first baseman's glove you've seen 1,000 times. And then the night became confetti. Somewhere in the sound, you could hear a franchise crossing a line it had been approaching for a decade, from perennial to inevitable, from great to dynastic, from building an ace to being built around one. When the stories of this run are told with the affectionate inaccuracies that time always permits, someone will swear they knew Yamamoto would take the ball on 1 day's rest, that the posture in his warm-up tosses made it obvious that the grip on the last splitter was loose, easy, destined. The truer and better story is more ordinary and more impressive. The Dodgers constructed the conditions for that decision to be rational. They paid the posting fee because they planned on needing leverage. They declined deferrals because they wanted certainty with teeth. They trusted the manager because he had been rehearsing ruthless choices for 10 years. And they asked a pitcher born for big rooms to treat the biggest room in the sport like a familiar hallway. The era began before the flight to Toronto, of course. in boardrooms and scouting reports, in a Tokyo winter where pens made louder noises than bats. But eras need coronations, and baseball, bless it, still provides them in moments you can freeze. 3 wins in a single World Series, 1 day's rest for the last 2 2/3, a double play to end the season, back-to-back champions after a 25-year drought for the feet. Wrap a dynasty around those facts, and you have something that isn't just a team anymore. You have a standard. And so the Yamamoto era begins the way the best baseball eras always do, with a pitcher walking off the back of the mound as though nothing extraordinary has happened, even though everything has. The scoreboard says 5-4. History says back-to-back champions. 2024, beating New York and bearing the full season critique. There are World Series that feel like a coronation, and there are World Series that feel like a cross-examination. 2024 was the latter. The Dodgers arrived with a decade's worth of regular season excellence and a single ring from the shortened 2020 campaign, a championship they cherished and the rest of the country sometimes treated like a conditional clause. The only way to make the verdict permanent was to win under the sport's longest light, against an opponent the sport never stops mythologizing, and to do it in a way that settled arguments rather than inflamed them. The bracket obliged. The Yankees waited at the end, the most cinematic foil possible, and the Dodgers answered with a 5-game dispatch that turned a talking point into an epitaph. But before the postcard nights in late October, Los Angeles had to do the unglamorous work of getting there. The NLDS against San Diego became a stress test for all the Dodgers said they'd learned since 2019. The Padres hit first, loud enough to jolt the bowl at Chavez Ravine, and then the series devolved into the kind of tug-of-war that usually ends with one team's bullpen looking older than it really is. Game 5 was the hinge. On October 11th at Dodger Stadium, with Yu Darvish and Yoshinobu Yamamoto writing a page of Japanese baseball history as the first pair of Japanese-born starters to face each other in an MLB postseason game, the Dodgers pitched to the margins and refused to blink, winning 2-0 to take the series 3-2 and move on. In the space of 48 hours, they'd shut San Diego out twice and looked more like a team closing a chapter than starting a new one. The NLCS against the Mets had a different timbre, less trench warfare, more stereo. Los Angeles won in 6 and scored like a team intent on erasing a few years of bottled-up October offense. The series became a running demonstration of depth. Walker Buehler and the bullpen strung up zeros in a blowout shutout at Citi Field. Tommy Edman morphed into a Swiss Army knife with timing, taking MVP honors for plays that rarely age badly. Contact in leverage, defense that cleans up messes, base running that shows up in the right column. By October 20th, after a 10-5 Game 6 at Dodger Stadium, the Dodgers were through, and the city started preparing for a World Series that felt both old and new at once. Los Angeles versus New York, this time with Shohei Ohtani in blue and Aaron Judge in the other dugout. What happened next is the kind of 5-day sequence that lives in the building forever. Game 1 at Dodger Stadium, October 26, 2024, a night humid with expectation and history. Tied late, the bases loaded, the count full of nerves, and Freeman, equal parts elegance and menace, stepping into a moment that almost never works out this cleanly. He turned on a pitch and wrote himself into the record. The first walk-off grand slam in World Series history, a swing that detonated the canyon and reset the tone of the entire week. You could feel the series lurch under your feet. This wasn't just a win, it was a gravitational event. A walk-off like that doesn't merely paint the highlight reel, it rearranges decision trees. For the next 48 hours, New York managed from the back foot. Game 2 tightened the air and rewarded minimalism. Game 3 became an extended argument about execution. And suddenly, the Dodgers were up 3-0, not because they were a 3 true outcomes monolith, but because they had stopped giving away innings. The Yankees stole Game 4 to keep the drama honest. October rarely allows a sweep when the names on the jerseys read like American iconography. And then the series rode the subway to its thunderous conclusion in the Bronx. Game 5 at Yankee Stadium, October 30th, 2024, looked like a parade route for the home team through 4 innings. New York led 5-0 and was busy playing a greatest hits medley. Judge homering, the ball carrying to the short porch, the noise craning for old ghosts. The Dodgers, who had spent a decade practicing patience, did something more useful. They created time. In the 5th, the Yankees' defense sprang leaks. Misplays, a catcher's interference, a balk that felt like a brain cramp, and Los Angeles poured through. 5 unearned runs later, the evening had gone from procession to coin flip. The 8th delivered the verdict. A pair of sacrifice flies, first Gavin Lux to tie, then Mookie Betts to lead, turned the rally into a result. 7-6, Dodgers confetti in a visitor's park, the franchise's first full season title since 1988, and a country's worth of arguments suddenly out of air. The night was a lesson in how October compresses all your habits into a few moments. The Dodgers did not try to homer their way out of a hole all at once. They made the 5th inning as long as it needed to be. They trusted a defense that's allowed to be anonymous until it saves a run. They ran the bases without trying to make a movie of it. And when the 8th brought leverage, they produced a pair of outs that scored runs. The kind of baseball play that makes sabermetricians nod and old heads sigh in relief. The 9th belonged to a pitcher who once ate innings for a living, and now, in the best kind of irony, ate 3 outs for a save. Walker Buehler finished cleanly, and the Dodgers exhaled as champions. Hours later, the official paperwork matched what everyone had seen on television. Freddie Freeman as World Series MVP, with a stat line that felt both gaudy and inevitable. Home runs in the first 4 games of the series and 12 RBIs, a tie for the World Series record. You could pick any of those swings and tell a story about a decade of hitters' meetings distilled into a handful of seconds. But the arc from Game 1 to Game 5 also told a larger truth about how the Dodgers had learned to live in October. They controlled uncertainty by narrowing the places where chaos could enter. They didn't win because baseball suddenly became fair. They won because baseball was still unfair, and they had decided not to give away any more ground than physics required. If you wanted to make a map of the postseason that led to that final night, you draw it as a series of solved problems. San Diego's power, solved with strike throwing and the kind of defensive sobriety that doesn't trend online. The Mets' streaky torque, solved with innings that refused to balloon and a lineup that turned every mistake into a crooked number, enough to hand Tommy Edman an NLCS MVP for being the connective tissue of the series. New York's aura at Yankee Stadium, solved with a rally that treated pressure like a riddle rather than a curse. The Dodgers didn't dominate every pitch. They dominated the shape of games. When to extend, when to inhale, when to let an inning end and live to fight the next matchup. And then there were the individual scripts within the larger play. Shohei Ohtani, still a hitter only in October as his elbow rehabbed, altered the geometry of every lineup card. You don't get Freeman's pitches without the dread Ohtani creates, and you don't get the parade of RBI chances without the way Mookie Betts insists on living on base in months when lesser players shrink. On the pitching side, the Dodgers found October value in non-heroic virtues. Throwing strike one, parking ambush heaters at the top of the zone when the count allowed, and leveraging Yamamoto and the bullpen without chasing romance. It's telling that the few capital M moments in this postseason, Freeman's grand slam, the Bronx comeback, were built from 1,000 less famous decisions. The house wins because the house keeps its books. Even the headlines in the morning papers seem to understand the narrative gravity. Associated Press called it what it was. The Dodgers overcame a 5-run canyon and benefited from a New York defensive unraveling to take Game 5 in the series, and Freeman's series became the shorthand for the whole thing. Reuters wrote it as a clincher that avoided a transcontinental reset, with Betts' late-inning sacrifice fly standing in for a franchise that had spent 162 games rehearsing the exact kind of plate appearance that October demands. Le Monde, writing from an ocean away, captured the matter-of-fact inevitability of a team that had been here before and now had refused to let the night get out of hand. You don't get that kind of global convergence unless the story has clarity. The best team in baseball had played like it when it mattered most. The Yankees didn't so much lose the series as watch it be taken from them. That's an important distinction for the Dodgers ledger. In the Bronx, on a Wednesday night that looked like it had already chosen its headline, Los Angeles insisted on writing another paragraph. They won without a single 5 RBI outburst. They won with sacrifice flies and situational discipline. They won because their bullpen took a game that was listing badly and righted it before it capsized. October often rewards violence. Here it rewarded coherence. Context helps explain why 2024 felt definitive, rather than merely triumphant. For years, the Dodgers critics had treated 2020 as a kind of parenthetical. The team itself never did. A trophy is a trophy. The parade route smells the same. But the background noise persisted, the way all lazy narratives do. The only way to hush it was to win a title under the old conditions: full schedule, full bracket, full glare. Beating the Yankees in a 5-game World Series with a first walk-off grand slam in Game 1 and a 5-run comeback to clinch in Game 5 is less checking the box than underlining the sentence. The argument ended not because the loudest voices changed their minds, but because there was nothing left to say. It also recalibrated the clubhouse's sense of proportion. When you've been living in October for a decade, you start to recognize the seasons inside the season. There's the stretch where the rotation takes shape. There's the month where the bench audition becomes a negotiation. There's the week where someone decides whether the 7th belongs to a veteran slider or a rookie's nerve. By the time the Dodgers hit mid-October in 2024, those micro-seasons had stacked into a kind of organizational weather. You could see it in Dave Roberts' dugout demeanor: impatient with sloppiness, patient with process, and in the way Los Angeles kept removing losing edges on nights when they didn't have their best fastball. That's how you win a Game 5. You have no business winning. You don't try to hit a 6-run homer. You get on base, you move a runner, you force a throw, you let the other guy make the mistake for once. The Dodgers had spent years being the team other clubs had to be perfect against. They finally made someone else live under that pressure and watch the cracks form. The series also changed the way the sport talked about the lineup's architecture. The national conversation had treated Betts, Freeman, Ohtani as a fireworks display. In October, it looked more like city planning. Betts set the pace, long at bats that turned the first inning into an exploration rather than a sprint. Freeman turned pitchers' plans into compromises, the swing decisions of a man who refuses to be hurried. Ohtani made it impossible to hide. Even when he wasn't the author of the moment, he was its atmosphere, on base, on deck, on everyone's mind. That trio didn't carry the Dodgers so much as they stretched the field around them until the Yankees ran out of room to maneuver. Once the series tightened into leverage, the rest of the lineup had easier math to solve, and solved it. Put all of that together, and 2024 becomes more than a ring in the case. It becomes the redefinition the era required. The Dodgers weren't chasing aesthetic points. They were chasing finality. They found it by winning not only a championship, but a specific version of a championship. One that began with a sequence baseball had never seen, the Freeman walk-off, and ended with one that baseball hadn't seen in a while, a road clincher built on discipline rather than demolition. The ledger is clean. Dodgers 4, Yankees 1. Freeman, MVP. A first walk-off grand slam to open. A 5-run comeback to close. And an organization that walked out of the Bronx with the nagging parenthetical finally crossed out. And if you're inclined to believe that October writes forward as much as it writes down, look at what this series did to the Dodgers' next 12 months. It stripped away the residue of doubt. It told them their small ball choices hold up in big rooms. It gave the manager proof that the quick hook doesn't manufacture panic when the bullpen can handle the oxygen. It gave Freddie Freeman a personal mythology that fits in a city that speaks fluent legend. And it gave the roster a shared conviction that would matter when 2025 tightened into a Game 7 on the road. We have done this before, from behind, with the world yelling. They would, of course, do it again, with different authors in the same posture. In the end, 2024 wasn't the beginning of a dynasty so much as the point where a long arc finally intersected with inevitability. The Dodgers didn't need a villain to beat, though the pinstripes did their part to make the pictures timeless. They needed a script that allowed them to be themselves under the loudest lights. They got it. History will keep the shorthand. First walk-off grand slam, 5-run comeback clincher, Freeman MVP, because it likes neat labels. The people who were there will remember something quieter. An inning becoming possible, then likely, then done. A ballpark inhaling together and exhaling in relief. A decade of lessons condensed into a week. The Dodgers buried the full season critique with a 5-game series that felt like a decade finally agreeing with itself. 2025, survive, adapt, repeat. A Game 7 for the time capsule. Repeating is a contradiction. The calendar promises chaos. The Dodgers promised sameness. Somewhere between those two truths, 2025 unfolded like a season-long stress test, a gauntlet that made even the juggernaut relearn how to breathe in tight rooms. The end result was a sentence with weight. Back-to-back champions. The first time anyone pulled it off in a quarter century. And they did it by winning a Game 7 on the road, with a script that felt borrowed from a different era and upgraded for this one. The prologue was practical. The Dodgers didn't ease into October. They swept the wild card and walked straight into a division series versus Philadelphia, the club that had haunted plenty of National League contenders. The Dodgers took that NLDS 3-1, a sequence that included Shohei Ohtani's first postseason start as a Dodger and the steady appearance of a bullpen that would need to be trustworthy before it could be spectacular. The bracket positioned Los Angeles as the undercard for a week, but by the end of it, they were back in their usual role as the problem everyone else had to solve. Then came the NLCS, and with it, the kind of performance that turns recaps into folklore. The opponent, Milwaukee. The result, a 4-game sweep, the Dodgers' first sweep in a best-of-7 since 1963, executed with a clinical coldness that made the series feel shorter than it was. And the clincher, Game 4 at Dodger Stadium, belonged to Ohtani in a way postseason baseball rarely allows. 6 scoreless innings on the mound with 10 strikeouts and 3 home runs at the plate. An almost ludicrous two-way line that handed him NLCS MVP on the spot and left national writers reaching for phrases like greatest ever. Even the skeptical outlets led with awe. The box scores couldn't contain it. Milwaukee hit .118 in the series, scoring exactly 4 runs total. Los Angeles gave up 1 run per game and made each of those runs feel like a footnote. The pennant was theirs again. That set the stage for a World Series with the Toronto Blue Jays, a matchup that could have been dismissed as novelty until the baseball started. Then it turned into theater, and then into history. ESPN's ledger reads, like a miniseries, Toronto 11-4 in Game 1, a Dodgers 5-1 correction in Game 2-2, a 6-5 LA win in 18 innings in Game 3, a 6-2 Jays counterpunch in Game 4, 6-1 Jays in Game 5 to push LA to the ledge, the Dodgers 3-1 stay alive in Game 6, and finally Game 7. Dodgers 5, Blue Jays 4, 11. The kind of line that looks clean on a standings page and feels chaotic in your chest. Even before the last night, the series had already written itself into the margins of the record book. Will Smith caught every inning of a World Series that stretched to 73 innings, 18 in Game 3, 11 in Game 7, and still had the legs and teeth to crush the swing that would decide the season. Catchers are usually mythologized for absorbing punishment. Smith added authorship. MLB put it plainly the morning after, caught every pitch, then hit the decisive extra inning homer that defined the decade. But everything this series became, one of the best ever, as the columnists started to write in the afterglow, crystallized on November 2nd in Toronto, a game with more pivot points than a freeway interchange. Blue Jays 4, Dodgers 3, bottom 9. Rogers Center was trying to inhale the last outs, and Los Angeles found oxygen in a place no one circled on the program. Miguel Rojas, hitless to that point in the series, stepped into a 2-strike world and pulled the rest of the night toward him. A game-tying home run off Jeff Hoffman with 2 outs in the 9th. The AP called it historic. The Blue Jays called it heartbreaking. 1 at-bat later, the building had changed temperature. The 11th became the soundbite. Will Smith, already the series Iron Man, turned on a pitch and hit the first extra inning home run ever to win a winner-take-all World Series game. A swing so final, it made the Dodgers dugout look like it jumped in unison. 2 innings after Rojas had stunned Toronto, Smith had quieted it. ESPN, AP, everybody wrote it the same way, because there wasn't another way. First of its kind, a swing that rearranged a century of punchlines. Then came the decision that will live in every version of this story. Dave Roberts handed the endgame to Yoshinobu Yamamoto on 1 day's rest. He had thrown 96 pitches in Game 6. He took the ball anyway and gave the Dodgers 2 2/3 scoreless to finish the season, escaping a bases-loaded jam in the ninth and ending it with a double play. Reuters' capsule made it plain. World Series MVP, third win of the series. The first pitcher to do that since Randy Johnson, 2001, 1.02 ERA across 17 2/3 innings, and a final frame that felt like a throwback, performed at modern speed. If 2024 had been the year Los Angeles shut the door on an old argument, 2025 was the year they kicked open a new room, the one where the ace can also be the closer if the night demands it. If you watch those last 6 outs again, a few truths surface. First, the Dodgers didn't treat roles like commandments. Leverage was the only rule. Second, they had the roster depth to make that choice rational instead of cinematic. Pulling a Game 6 starter into Game 7 on fumes only works if the innings behind him are covered by competence, not hope. LA built the machine over years. On this night, it ran without squeaks. Third, they trusted Smith to catch all of it, 73 innings in one World Series, and still be quick enough to frame edges and strong enough to finish the throw on the last double play. That's not a one-night story. That's an era showing its habits all at once. Context made the ending sharper. The Dodgers had trailed the series 3-2 and the game 4-3 in the ninth. Toronto had the crowd, the lead, and a bullpen with velocity. That's the part dynasties always keep quiet about. The odds. What they say out loud is the part everyone saw. The belief that their next at-bat will be the right one. The Jays' postmortems told it with admirable candor. Hoffman wore the blame for the ninth. Shane Bieber accepted his slice for the Smith pitch in the 11th. The clubhouse admitted they had chances and didn't maximize them. A bases-loaded ninth without a run. A handful of near misses that in April become footnotes and in November become epitaphs. Across the hall, the Dodgers talked less about destiny and more about sequence. Keep the line moving, push the game forward, wait for the inning that chooses you. And yet, the series wasn't only the bookend moments, it was a long tug of style. Game 3's 18-inning epic in Los Angeles bent the bullpen in weird angles and gave the catcher his first hint of immortality. Game 5 in Toronto pushed the Dodgers to a ledge, with columns questioning whether Mookie Betts would wake up in time. Game 6 became a Yamamoto masterclass in economy to force the decider. By the morning of Game 7, Tim Kurkjian could write the thing we were all thinking, that this had a claim to greatest World Series ever, a modern 7-game set, with swings so violent you needed timestamps to keep them straight. The internal ESPN notebooks read the same way. Dynasty cemented, legend made, repeat complete. If the language sounded breathless, it's because the baseball earned the breath. The implications arrived fast. Back-to-back champions for the first time since 1999 to 2000, and the first NL team to repeat since the 75-76 Reds. The kind of historical scaffolding that makes a franchise feel inevitable on the page and in the room. The MVP plaque went to Yamamoto, the cap to Cooperstown, and the parade route to the familiar boulevards that had already learned how to carry a city in blue. Within 48 hours, the Dynasty conversation that had felt like a talk show became the calendar. The Dodgers weren't just the best team of the moment. They were the standard other teams had to measure against. What makes the Dodgers repeat particularly modern is everything around the highlights. The attendance that turned Chavez Ravine into an amplifier all summer. A franchise record. 4,012,470 fans. First MLB club past 4 million since 2008. Didn't win any at-bats, but you could hear its echo every time a leverage inning needed to lengthen. The league itself ticked to 71.4 million in 2025. Pace, pitch clock, and star power doing their work. And Los Angeles sat at the front of the parade. The point of those receipts isn't economics, it's infrastructure. A healthy sport gives your heavy choices more room. A full building gives your manager permission to be brave. Both were true here. The repeat also depended on a constant renegotiation of roles. That's not a small thing. It's an organizational value. Consider the lineup shuffles during the leaner middle of the series. Andy Page's sitting. Mookie Betts bumped in the order. Alex Call starting in left. Tweaks that looked like tinkering until they turned into a team that arrived ready for Game 6 and calm for Game 7. October is littered with managers who chase narratives. Roberts chased matchups and oxygen. It wasn't pretty for 5 or 6 innings at a time. It didn't have to be. If you prefer to hold the whole postseason in one hand, there's a cleaner summary. The Dodgers sailed through the wild card, solved the Phillies in 4 with Ohtani's two-way presence and a bullpen that passed its math tests, then burned through the NLCS behind the most audacious October performance we've seen from a pitcher-hitter since the word audacious was invented. They reached a Game 7 in a road park with a deficit on the board and 2 outs to give, and they still found the narrow path through. Rojas tied it. Smith won it. Yamamoto finished it. 4 verbs that cover a month. The dynasty question, asked with a smirk for years, finally answered itself. It's not just the trophies, it's how they were won. 2024 answered the full season chorus with a 5-game dismissal of the Yankees that began with the first walk-off grand slam in World Series history and ended with a 5-run comeback to clinch in the Bronx. 2025 demanded a 7-game opera, a catcher's Iron Man act, a 9th-inning rescue from a veteran role player, and a starter turned closer cool enough to make a bases-loaded 9th feel like a problem to be solved, rather than a ghost to be chased. You can build a dynasty on either blueprint. The Dodgers built it on both. Underneath the fireworks, the choices stayed consistent. Leverage over labels, depth over sentiment, courage over convention. That's why a 12-year, no-deferral ace can also be a 2-inning fireman when the season asks. That's why a lineup led by Betts, Freeman, Ohtani can win on a night when only the last of those 3 gets pitched to, or when none of the 3 is the author of the headline. That's why a catcher can catch 73 innings in one series and still have enough left to flip the sports record book in the 11th. And that's why a team can stand at the edge of elimination. In Game 6, step back, and then keep walking until they've reached the place almost no one reaches anymore, the second straight parade. The morning after, the language got simple because the facts did the talking. Dodgers 5, Blue Jays 4, in 11 innings. Series 4-3, back-to-back champions. Yamamoto, World Series MVP. Another city turned its lights to blue. Another off-season began with everyone else asking for a map to a place only one team had found lately. The rest of the details, Smith's swing, Rojas' lifeline, the decision to put the season in Yamamoto's right hand on no rest, are the kind of things that live on plaques and in parade chants. Repeats always feel improbable until the confetti lands the second time. Then they feel like a law of physics the rest of the league forgot to study. The Dodgers didn't cheat the law. They learned it. They didn't outrun variance. They engineered around it. And on a night in Toronto that will spend the next decade playing on loop, they made the contradiction of repeating look like the most natural thing a great team could do. How a dynasty sustains itself, depth, development, dollars, and the ledger that proves it. Dynasties don't just happen, they continue. The first banner is the spark. The second is the proof. Everything after that is maintenance. The slow, unglamorous craft of making excellence repeatable. The Dodgers built a machine that could feed itself, a money plan that buys certainty without starving the bench, a player dev pipeline that keeps competence on tap, a manager who treats labels as suggestions in October, and a stadium plus fan base that turns home dates into an energy source. You could call it culture. You could call it infrastructure. Either way, it's what separates a great team from a modern dynasty. Start with the part most people point at first, the money. In December 2023, the Dodgers added the best player on earth, and at the very same time, made their roster more flexible. That sentence shouldn't be possible, unless the contract isn't just a contract, it's technology. Shohei Ohtani's 10-year, $700 million deal came with a deferral structure the sport had never seen. He defers $68 million of his $70 million each year, getting just $2 million annually during the deal, with the deferred $680 million paid, without interest, from 2034 to 2043. Present value matters for the competitive balance tax. Ohtani compressed it on purpose to expand what the Dodgers could do now. MLB.com and CBS both spelled it out in plain language, and even the wire services noted the unusual opt-out tied to leadership continuity, making clear that the structure isn't trivia, it's a team-building tool. The club then did the equal and opposite thing with its next winter swing. A week later, Los Angeles committed to Yoshinobu Yamamoto on a 12-year, $325 million pact, at the time the largest guaranteed deal ever for a pitcher, and did it with no deferrals, adding a $50 million signing bonus and the approximately $50 million posting fee to Oryx on top. ESPN, MLB.com, AP, and others aligned on the essentials. Clean present tense dollars for a present tense ace, because October certainty at the top of the rotation is a place you pay full freight. The two moves together are the blueprint. Use a unicorn's deferrals to create oxygen. Spend that oxygen where leverage lives. Money is a means, not a trophy. The point is options. A deferral-light CBT footprint plus a fully paid ace produces roster redundancy. The 24th and 26th men who win random Tuesdays and cover weird Saturdays, so you arrive in October with choices. It also buys patience. You don't have to press prospects into savior roles. You can let player dev do its work and promote competence on time, not ahead of it. That philosophy shows up in the dugout as posture. Dave Roberts isn't managing to protect a thin roster. He's managing to exploit a deep one. The second pillar of sustainability is the thing fans only notice when it breaks: flow. Baseball is a logistics sport disguised as a pastoral one. The Dodgers turned the building itself into an advantage. The $100 million stadium makeover completed for 2020. The center field plaza as the new front door. Upgraded outfield pavilions, bridges and elevators that knit the bowl together. Bullpen view bars, AD access that works. Converted a mid-century palace into a modern pressure chamber that still looks like summer. That wasn't accidental or cosmetic. It was planned stagecraft. The LA Times and Ballpark Digest cover the designs and intent. Give fans more places to gather without losing the game, and give the ballpark more ways to stay loud for 3 hours. The result is an environment that raises the average inning, not because sound wins pitches, but because attention does. That environment filled up, and then some. The attendance curve tells its own story. MLB has grown 3 straight seasons, cresting 71.4 million in 2025, with faster games and star power credited for the rise. The Dodgers sat on the league's prow. They became the first team since 2008 to surpass 4 million at the gate, and the 10th club ever to hit that plateau, finishing 2025 at 4,012,470, average 49,537. Reuters tallied the league total and named the Dodgers as the pace setter. The Dodgers' own release and local coverage documented the milestones: 2 million by the 40th home date, 3M by the 60th, the record at the buzzer. Attendance isn't a single at-bat stat, but it is a budget and a backdrop, underwriting depth, while amplifying moments. Depth is also about what you buy and how you use it. October is not July with a bigger spotlight. It's almost a different sport. Ben Lindbergh has been writing that truth for years. That short series randomness, modern bullpen usage, and leverage-only roles make the postseason its own ecosystem. Treating October as a separate problem to be solved is part of the Dodgers' advantage. Their stars are for the last week. Their layers are for the 6 months that get you to the last week, with options intact. Those layers come from a player development pipeline that prizes plug-and-play competence over lottery tickets. That's boring until you need the 9th reliever in July, and he looks like a big leaguer on delivery. It's also why the organization can be ruthless about roles in October. When you know the middle is covered, you can move the apex. That's what the Yamamoto deal purchased in practical terms, not just a number. 1 every 5th day, but the freedom to use your best arm whenever the season demands, because the infrastructure below will absorb the ripple. At this point, someone will say the quiet part out loud. Money helps. Of course it does, but if money alone made dynasties, every large market team would be won. What the Dodgers have paired with resources is discipline, Andrew Friedman's calling card since he arrived to run baseball ops in 2014, and a willingness to engineer contracts as tools, not trophies. Ohtani's deferrals aren't a quirk. They are a strategic decision that shapes how many other strategic decisions you can make. Yamamoto's no deferral pillar and posting fee outlay aren't extravagance. They're an admission that certainty at the top of the rotation is a different kind of asset. The front office bought optionality and certainty at the same time, and gave the manager permission to be aggressive when it mattered. This is where the final pillar loops back to the first. Place fuels process. The renovated ballpark makes the nightly experience sticky. The nightly experience pushes the turnstiles. The turnstiles fund the redundancy that becomes October calm. The LA Times even framed the 2025 tweaks as mostly hidden, because the big changes had already happened. The outfield pavilions and plaza made Dodger Stadium's new front door. And under the feet of 4 million fans, the players enjoyed an upgraded home clubhouse, the sort of quality of life detail that shows up in April but cashes out in October. Now zoom out to the ledger, the part of any dynasty conversation that's not subjective. In your story, as established earlier in this script, The Dodgers finished their long project with back-to-back titles in 2024 and 2025. That 2-year chorus is what transforms era of excellence into dynasty in modern baseball's expanded playoff reality. It's not just because repeating is rare, it is, but because repeating now asks you to navigate a tournament optimized for variance, while still being the best team at the end. Writers debate definitions. Wikipedia reduces a dynasty to dominance for an extended length of time, which is hand-wavy, but in MLB's current structure, consecutive is as close as we get to objective proof. 2 Novembers, same champion, under rules designed to prevent exactly that. That's the standard. What sits beneath that standard is where the Dodgers model earns its reputation. Contracts as competitive tech. Ohtani's deferrals, 97% of annual salary pushed out. $2 million in season, 2034 to 2043 payout window without interest. Compressed present value and open CBT headroom. Yamamoto's no deferral mega pact, plus $50 million bonus and posting fee. $50 million. Puts real immediate dollars at the precise spot where October leverage lives. MLB.com, ESPN, AP, and CBS converge on the guts of both deals. The architecture isn't accidental, it's strategy. Stadium is amplifier. The pre-2020 center field, plaza, and pavilion rebuild created 360-degree circulation, bullpen view sightlines, and places for a crowd to stay inside the game while moving, which is why September still sounds like June, and why 7th innings feel longer when Los Angeles is chasing. The pieces were reported years ago. The effect shows up nightly. Demand as cushion, $71.4 million across MLB in 2025, $4,012,470 at Chavez Ravine alone. That scale doesn't call pitches, but it absolutely finances redundancy. And redundancy is October's favorite currency. It also means a lot of two-strike roars. Reuters labeled the league-wide rise and named the Dodgers the attendance leader. The team and local outlets logged the records. Postseason as separate problem. October isn't just smaller samples, it's different usage. If you build for that, you have an edge. More multi-positional competence, more matchup bats, more permission to reassign your best starter as your highest leverage reliever on the one night the season needs it. That's the logic Lindbergh and others keep underlining about modern playoffs. Leadership that shrinks noise. You don't get aggressive, label-agnostic decisions in November without the boring, reliable ones in May. The Dodgers' edge isn't only payroll, it's the way they treat failure as feedback and keep their choices coherent across 6 months. So the 9th inning of a Game 7 feels like the next rational step, not a gamble. Everything above is replicable in theory and difficult in practice. Lots of teams can write checks. Not many can design a roster that always has one more competent player ready when the sport tries to make you thin. Lots of teams can renovate a ballpark. Fewer can shape fan flow to feed baseball leverage instead of pulling attention away from it. Lots of teams can tell themselves they'll be brave in October. Very few can backstop that bravery with the layers that make bold choices good choices instead of hero ball. Which brings us to the part people will argue about on bar stools and in comment sections. Is it a dynasty? If your bar is sustained dominance, the Dodgers cleared it even before the second ring. A decade of division titles and 100-win seasons that made October a standing appointment. If your bar is consecutive, the hardest thing the sport allows, then, as this script has established, 2024 and 2025 answered that too. A 2-year coronation in an age of 12-team brackets is about as objective as this subjective word gets. And if your bar is infrastructure, the sense that a thing could keep going, the building, the contracts, the turnstiles, and the conveyor belt of competence all argue that Los Angeles hasn't reached the edge of its map yet. A last word about context, because dynasties live there. MLB deliberately made October less predictable. More rounds, more off days, more leverage-only innings. Analytics made bullpens deeper and platoons sharper. The rule changes made regular season baseball faster and, in a funny way, louder. More engaged crowds, more weeknight energy. In that ecosystem, repeating is close to impossible. The Dodgers made it look probable, not because the sport suddenly got fair, but because they built cushions against the parts that aren't. Money turned into margin, margin into depth, depth into nerve. The ballpark learned to sing on cue. The roster learned to flex on command. The manager learned to choose leverage over labels. And a franchise learned how to make the last out feel familiar. If you want a neat definition for the scrapbook, a modern dynasty is a team that 1. Demonstrates sustained, multi-year dominance in the regular season, 2. Solves October as its own problem, and 3. Repeats under conditions engineered to prevent repetition. The Dodgers, as told in this project, check all 3 boxes. The ledger has 2 clean lines at the end. The spreadsheet underneath hums with future plans. You can trace the arcs back through the sluice gates of finance, the quiet of player development, the flow of a stadium turned inside out, the patience of a manager who wears pressure like a rhythm. But you can also hold a simpler picture, a team that has made again feel like its native language. Call that a standard if you like. In Los Angeles, it's just the way the building sounds in late October, that low, confident hum that says a season has ended and an era has not.